I just met with a developer client from New Zealand, and I think his approach to risk management and his awareness of risk are really worth sharing. Let me give you two numbers first, 70 and 6. Whether you're considering buying your first investment property or you're already experienced and have made money in real estate, I think it's worth spending 3 minutes to listen to this. Why is that? Because it has just gone through the same property depreciation that New Zealand is currently experiencing. So what has the situation been like in Australia over the past 5 years? If you bought in Brisbane, if you bought in Perth, or if you bought in Adelaide, generally speaking, as long as you didn't touch apartments or units, of course in some crazy areas even apartments are going up. Most people have a misconception. They think that they have the vision and the ability and that as long as they pick a property, it will appreciate in value. But listen, you really need to distinguish between following the trend, catching the wind, and actual ability. When you're riding this wave, as long as you buy a house, it will basically go up in value. It's very hard for anyone to buy a property that goes down. But you need to understand, once an extreme situation happens, what do I mean by an extreme situation? Just look at New Zealand and Australia during the early stages of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. Many cities were very similar, with prices soaring everywhere. But if you look back from where we are today, in quite a few cities in New Zealand, housing prices have already fallen back to 2021 levels, and in some places they're still dropping. Of course, there are also areas that are still holding strong at their peak. For example, in Queenstown, some properties are still appreciating in value, which is quite similar to certain places in Australia. So for this developer, some of his properties are dropping in price while others are rising, and he's also selling off the ones that are declining. So the two indicators I want to talk about, the two indicators that he and I agreed upon, these two indicators can guarantee the lower limit of your investment. All right, you really need to pay attention to this. Now, there are a lot of rather aggressive approaches circulating online, right? You might have seen or heard about things like not repaying the principal on your loan, just borrowing as much as you can, or even cashing out repeatedly. Of course, I've seen some newcomers who are even crazier. They keep cashing out, sometimes even with just a 10% down payment. In today's interest rate environment, and given the current geopolitical situation, using just a 10% down payment to further increase leverage and buy even more properties. In my opinion, this kind of aggressive approach isn't about buying houses. It's about buying one bomb after another. And why is that? Because when property prices are rising, you don't have any problems. But if you look at New Zealand, anyone who did this in 2020 would definitely have gone personally bankrupt by now, because the leverage was stretched too far. Now let's go back to those two indicators we just mentioned and talk about how you can use them. The first point is that these two indicators revolve around how to secure the bottom line of your investment. In other words, in the most extreme situations no one wants to see, if they do happen, how can you ensure your minimum threshold so that your life won't be affected? The first point is a 70% owner occupancy rate. When you buy a property, it's best to check the owner occupancy rate on your street. Check the rental situation of your neighbors around you and you'll get a sense of it. Ideally, the owner occupancy rate on this street should be over 70%, or rather, I think it must be over 70%. This way, even if extreme situations occur, no one will be dumping properties on this street. If no one is selling, there are no transaction prices and therefore no so-called price drops, right? So why is this related to owner-occupied homes? Because owner-occupied homes are always the last asset people will sell.